What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. This is your first time. I always appreciate some kind of interaction that you can give. Thank you guys so much for helping us hit 7K. And to continue our push for 10,000 subscribers, we are doing a giveaway, which I will be giving a sub pack away once we reach that 10K milestone. So with all that out of the way, we've also got a free Discord pack that you can check in the description if you like free samples. But what you just heard is what we are going to be doing today from scratch. You may or may not believe it, but it is actually from Addictive Drums. And today I'm going to be showing you how to synthesize your own boom bap drums, because there is almost nothing on the internet except for FL Studio how to make a boom bap beat. So I'm going to go over the drum pattern first because I do think that's the most important thing. And to kind of be honest with you guys, I think that if you have the kind of boom bap quote unquote swing, then it's a lot easier to use almost any kind of drums. However, for me personally, I'm really big on trying to make all my own assets and stuff without buying a bunch of sample packs. So if you have Addictive Drums, you've got a saturator and a couple of other maybe cool compressors or something, then I think that you'll be good to go. So let's go ahead and hop into this. The first thing that you're going to notice is that for the most part, the main kick and snare, so the 1, 2, 3, and 4 are always on beat. So we've got our kick and then we've got our snare. And the only thing that really kind of makes this move for this particular piece, because there's a lot of different ways to do this, is that the hi-hats are all still on eighth notes, but they're moved over slightly. So just giving a little bit of swing over here, and don't worry about actual values because you're going to kind of have to listen to it and how it sounds. And then you're going to see that the ghost notes over here are also a little bit off time as well. And so that way it gives us a little bit of leeway, because like you technically can push your kicks and snares a little bit off and a little bit on to make them more sloppy and stuff. There's not really a right or wrong way to do this, but this is more of a sense of feel as opposed to maybe divvying this up into like an actual septuplet or quintuplet grid. So that's pretty much how you get the gist of this. And then towards the second part of this tune, you will notice that I've got a ride here. And one cool thing that I like to do is instead of having my ride kind of on every beat, I will actually push the second one late, and then it will kind of catch back up here. Now you might notice that there's also a lot of different colors on here, and one cool trick that I'm going to show you just to give yourself some variation, especially with your hats, is if you highlight all of these over here and you go into your velocity, then you can actually randomize them. So that way your hats sound a little bit more alive as well. There is one more aspect to this. There are a couple of little stick hits, and I've kind of done the same thing where if you play this, and so what you can do is kind of the same thing where you can kind of align this on the grid here and then just push these a little bit late. And that way you can kind of have a little bit of a ballpark as opposed to trying to do every single note like by swinging that, because that's how things get messy super quick, at least in my experience. So with all that out of the way, that's pretty much a quick intro on how you do that kind of stuff. You want to add ghost notes and then you want to kind of push everything a little bit late. Let's go ahead and talk about how to actually make these drums. So I'm going to turn all this stuff off. This is what they sound like by themselves without any external processing. Which, to be honest, you can actually probably use these. There is a little bit of processing inside of Addictive Drums, and I'm going to go over this very quickly. But basically what you want to do is grab yourself a dry kit, and you want to use something that's dry, because if it has a bunch of reverb, then when you start applying distortion and stuff, it's like really easy to kind of overdo. So for me, I've turned the room down and turned the overheads down, kind of similar to if you've seen my trip hop drums tutorial or pretty much any other tutorial on drums in general. With the kick, the one thing that I've made sure to do is kind of move this over to the beater. We've added some really heavy distortion to give a nice transient, and so the longer attack that you have on a compressor and the longer release, the more punch that it's going to have. There's some EQ shaping over here. I'm just kind of thumping up the low end, and then I'm using a little bit of transient shaping with some attack and sustain. One thing that you're going to notice over here too on the volume envelope is that you kind of want to shape the kick to where it's a little bit more dry as well, because these are all recorded with room. Using the volume envelope is actually going to really help you kind of tighten everything up. So I encourage you to experiment with that. The snare is kind of the same deal. We've got a little bit of snare buzz, a little bit of this over here on the top and bottom. So that way you're getting a little bit more of that kind of pitter patter, I don't know. But we've also got some distortion. We've got some EQ over here, a little bit of transient shaping, and the same thing with the volume envelope. To keep this a little bit more consistent too, I've also turned on the no alts. And so that basically means that it's not going to play like a random send or whatever. The only thing that I have on this is just a little bit of compression and then just some EQ. And I didn't even process the rides, to be honest, but that's totally fine. Basically, whenever you're starting to try to make these drums thicker, it kind of goes with all the other drum tutorials that I have, where you want to add distortion, EQ, and then there's some character shaping that I'm going to show you through here, but it shouldn't be too much different than what you may or may not already be used to if you've been keeping up with my videos. And if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? So the first thing that we have is some saturation. You can either copy these settings or whatever, but I've cranked the drive and the low pass up to 224 hertz. It just adds some subtle thumpage to it. The next thing that we have is some EQ, and this is more so just cleaning everything up from the super low end. Nothing too crazy there. You can probably skip that step if you want. This is actually pretty important. This is a bit crusher, and that's going to help give us a little bit more grit. Now, it is kind of artificial, right? Because it is kind of artificial in that way, but if you kind of use it seldomly, then it will kind of give you just a little bit more character and a little bit more bite. One thing that's also going to be helpful is that there's a gate on this, and so once it reaches below a certain volume, it's actually going to cut that off, and so it kind of helps keep things dry. And you'll see that it's actually going to help kind of with the Wolf compressor here in a bit as well. So be sure to turn the width down a little bit, and sometimes the quantization might overkill this, so kind of dial that back a little bit as well. Next thing that we've got is another EQ. This is kind of what's going to help give us a little bit more of a lo-fi feel, and it doesn't make that big of a difference, but take a listen. And this is one trick that I picked up from watching some other videos, but if you kind of do this, it removes a little bit of the brightness of the drums, and so that sometimes that can be useful to kind of dull everything, I guess. The next thing that we have is a Wolf compressor. Now, an alternative to this, because it's pretty expensive, is isotope vinyl. They recently came out with a new version, and you can just kind of figure out, you know, like matching settings or whatever. But one thing with this is that it's going to kind of give you that quote-unquote lo-fi feel with a little bit of wow. Now, kind of as I said before, the big thing that this is doing as well is it's actually adding some noise to this. And so this on top of the bit crusher is actually helping it kind of dial out a bit. Back in the day with the old version, I had to actually just double check, but in the old version, this would actually run the noise while you weren't playing anything. So that would be one way to stop it. But I guess they kind of fixed that in the most recent update. But this is pretty much I haven't done anything. I've just turned it on. So the next thing that you have, if you have Ableton, you're in luck. If you don't, grab the glue, as you want a glue compressor with some kind of peak limiter. You can honestly just use a compressor and a limiter together, but I do like the character that this has. But basically you just crush this to heck with a low threshold and a little bit of makeup, and this is what's going to help make this loud. One of the final things that we have on here is just a little bit of reverb. I'm going to just solo the reverb here. Now, the significance of this is that it's just giving you a little bit of room to kind of replicate, you know, or quote unquote, like be a pseudo thing for that. But you honestly don't need it. It's just a little bit of extra if you want it. And these are the settings that I have. One thing that you do want to make sure, though, is that you want to have an EQ to make sure that you're taking out the low end of that. Otherwise, it's going to kind of cause some phase issues. But this is just the dry signal on the bottom. So together, they're just kind of having a little bit of subtle stereo information on the top. Last two things. This is pretty much just a mono low on the low band. So this is kind of my default thing, but all you do is you go and grab a tool, grab the width, and make sure that the kick is kind of bumping through without any stereo. And then this little guy right here is my secret weapon, which is just a soft clipper or a clipper in general. And all you have to do is, if this is really high like this, you'll see that these transients are all over the place. And so to control it, I think that was at 45, you kind of just bring this little bad boy down like this. And that kind of helps keep your transients kind of nice and clean. And it also gives it a little bit more, I guess, grit and stuff too. So other than that, that's pretty much how this goes. The entire song as goes is something like this. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments. And if you'd like me to cover the rest of this tune, then also let me know in the comments. Otherwise, let's play this out, and I'll see you in the next video.